All right, everyone. Good morning. I am Aaron Blumberg, Swiftland's Continuing Education Coordinator, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Handling the Storm of an Angry Customer. T is for Thank Them. We have a wonderful learning opportunity ready for you this morning with Linda Bruno. Linda has been developing and conducting training workshops for libraries and other organizations for more than 15 years. She offers workshops on topics ranging from leadership skills to returning balance and lots of areas in between. Linda received her MBA from the University of Florida and has years of experience in hands-on management positions. She develops her workshops based on solid research and, more importantly, real-life application. Linda is also certified with DDI and Achieve Global. Please welcome Linda and enjoy her webinar this morning. Linda?
Thank you so much, Aaron. I should have added to that bio that I also have a lot of years of experience in customer service. When I was in what I call my former life, I managed a customer service department of about 15 or 16 people at any given time, and we took upwards of over 1,000 calls a day during our busy season. And in our customer service department, we were, I would say, 90% complaints. Sometimes we would get to the point where we built relationships with people and they would call us instead of the order department to place orders, and that was always a happy thing. But most of the time it was handling the problems, handling the anger, handling the complaints. So I just wanted to throw that out there so that if you thought I had gone crazy when I said T is for thank them, I have been there, and I do know how stressful it can be to deal with angry customers, and I do know how hard it is to appreciate them when they are not being very nice and very kind. And as I said, in most cases for our department, most of them were not all that nice or kind. But I do want to give you a little story that happened during that time, and one of the things that made me put this particular word into our series was an instance that I had happen when I was the manager of that department. I got a call from a customer that I normally dealt with. He and I had just built a rapport, and so whenever he had issues, I was the one he called. And so he called one day, and we had made a major mistake, and it was obviously our fault. Somebody just wasn't paying attention. It had almost cost him a customer, and he was a very large customer of ours. And during the whole process, he was talking to me just like I'm talking to you. And as we started to figure out what our options were and how we could get this resolved to his satisfaction, I said, you know, Randy, I just want to say thank you for not yelling at me, not cursing at me, not being angry. I said, I know this is frustrating, and I feel so bad that this happened. And he said, you know, Linda, I have found out over the years that it doesn't pay to get angry. But I think he really appreciated the fact that I thanked him for that, because probably maybe most people didn't recognize that he was the exception to the rule. He was the one that didn't get angry. And so I actually thanked him for not getting angry, even though I knew he was upset. So when you think of anger, it's not always anger that's showing, is it? It's sometimes they're just frustrated, they're irritated, they're upset, they're disappointed, they're whatever. And there are opportunities within that to help build the relationship that you want to build so that they come back to your library. Because isn't that the whole reason we would want to handle the storm of an angry patron? Because we want them to come back. If we didn't care whether or not they came back, we would just dismiss them and do as little as we had to do. Some of us would not. But in many cases, if they were really mean to us, we would get rid of them as quickly as we could and hope that they never came back. And yet we know that if we did that, we wouldn't develop relationships, we wouldn't have enough patronage to keep our funding up, and then we wouldn't be a library anymore, because libraries do close. And the reason they close is that people stop coming to them in some cases. Now, in some cases, it's just a matter of funding, and somebody made a horrible mistake and decided the library was the easy place to cut. But in other instances, statistics show over the years that patronage has gone down and so forth, and part of that could be that relationships have not been developed. And part of that developing a relationship is you have to get through the negative as well as the positive, don't you? Think about the relationships in your own personal life. If you got rid of everybody you had a disagreement with, or that got angry with you, or was kind of mean to you, or hurt your feelings, or whatever it might be, some of us might not have anybody in our lives at all, because most of us experience that with the people we're close to, don't we? So in order to keep that relationship going, we have to nurture it in ways that might seem sort of not intuitive to us, because it's not intuitive to say thank you to a customer, is it, that's angry with you or frustrated or confused. I have had a couple instances where people have actually done this with me as the customer, and I always feel like they've taken the extra step to make sure I remain a customer when they do that. And that's why I wanted to include it today. So if you thought I was going off my rocker, I probably am, but not in this particular instance. So T is for thank them is what we're going to talk about today. And the first thing I thought I have to address that it's one of the most difficult things to do when you're dealing with an angry patron is to thank them. It just is counterintuitive. It's not something you would say, gee, thank you for screaming at me. Thank you for cursing at me. Thank you for being mean to me and hurting my feelings and personally attacking me. That's not what we're talking about, is it? But there is something underlying if they are thanking you. There's something, or if they are angry with you, there's something going on there, and their perception is that you've caused a problem for them. That is their truth. If that's what they perceive, then that is their truth, isn't it? Whether or not you perceive it was that big of a deal, that's what they perceive. So we need to understand that they're looking at it from their perspective. And one of the last things they would probably expect from you is for you to thank them in this process. How many of you, if you would just raise your hand or type in yes into the chat box, how many of you have ever experienced going, even in the last maybe 60 days, to a bank, a retail place, or whatever, where you were the customer and you handed over your hard-earned money for something and the person did not say thank you? Has that happened to anybody besides me? Yes, exactly. I went to a customer service convention many years ago when I was in my corporate job. It was put on by Inc. magazine. It was a big deal. They had big name speakers. My company flew me from Ohio to California. There were tracks that you followed through the day. And the first track that I went to was by a lady and a gentleman that had written a book on customer service. And that was one of the things that she brought up. She said, our world is getting away from saying thank you. And she said, I have gotten to the point where when I go out and I hand somebody my hard-earned money and they don't say thank you, I say you're welcome. And she said sometimes they don't even get it. But she said every once in a while they'll kind of grin like, uh-oh, I probably should have thanked my customer. And I thought that was a really good point. So think then how unusual it would be for them to be thanked for something in the process when they've been frustrated, because they're not even getting thanked when they give away their money to somebody. So I think it's just one of those points where you can go above and beyond, where you can be the exception to the rule, and they will remember that. But I will just qualify it by saying right up front this morning that it is a very difficult thing to do in the heat of the moment. Let me ask you this. Why is it difficult, do you think? Why is it difficult for us to say that? They're just words, and we don't want to say them flippantly because people will know they're flippant if we do that. But why do you think as human beings we have problems thanking people? Ego, exactly. Even when it's not a negative situation, sometimes our ego gets in the way, doesn't it, Adriana? If we're thanking somebody for their help or whatever, we don't want to admit that we even needed help. So imagine how difficult it must be when somebody's being angry with us. I think of the defensiveness that comes up in us automatically. And I'm just going to go off on a little tangent here. Some of you have heard me talk about emotional intelligence before. And Lynn said some of us are just not mannerly or considerate. Absolutely. It just doesn't come naturally to say thank you, does it, Lynn, for some people? So it's double not natural, if you can say that, for somebody to say thank you in the midst of a negative situation. But when we think about that defensiveness that comes up in us, that ego that comes up in us, that stubbornness, that pride, that obstinacy, if you will, that comes up in us when it's a negative situation, because we are defensive and we're trying to protect ourselves, aren't we? It's kind of fight or flight thing. And our way of fighting is to get defensive with those people. If you think about using emotional intelligence during these interactions, If you've ever studied Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence model, he talks about being self-aware. I think that's a great first step when we're trying to say thank you to a customer. Am I aware of the emotions that are coming up inside me? And I have to be aware of them in the moment to be self-aware. It can't be I got angry with a customer and I spouted off to them and tomorrow I realize I did that. It's in the moment. I feel those emotions coming on. The next element is self-management. Before they come out of my mouth and I make the situation worse, then I need to be aware that I'm angry, I'm defensive, I'm getting angry back, and I need to manage those emotions, because that leads to the next element of social awareness. If I say this and I spout off, I'm going to create more problems. That's social awareness. I'm aware of my social situation with the other person. I'm aware of their feelings. I'm aware of how what I say will affect those feelings. And then that's relationship management. So think about that. Self-awareness, self-management. Social awareness, relationship management. And you can't have the social awareness with the other person and manage that relationship unless you're aware of your own emotions popping up and you learn how to handle those. And one of the questions I love to ask people is, when we're getting defensive, rather than thinking of how we can thank the patron, we're getting defensive. I always like to ask people why. Why are we getting defensive? That's what I ask myself now. Once I studied emotional intelligence, I went, oh gosh, I never thought about it being my fault because it's my emotion and I need to control my own emotion. So now when I find myself getting defensive or angry, I will actually in my mind say, why are you angry? They have their perception, they have their reality, they have a right to their opinion. So why is that making you angry? And usually for me, it's because I feel like they are personally attacking me and they're making me feel less than. I had low self-esteem growing up. I still struggle with a core of that in my being. And so when somebody personally attacks me, it goes right to that core of my having low self-esteem. And then I get angry or defensive, but that's my issue, isn't it? So I think if we recognize that going into these situations, it makes it much easier for us to then actually thank them in the midst of a negative situation. When you thank them, your believability is going to be based on how sincere you sound. So if you come to a webinar today and next Tuesday you have an angry patron and you think, okay, Linda said thank you, and you say, thanks a lot for telling us. I think they're not going to believe you, don't you think? So you have to be sincere. And I know that if you're here today, you sincerely want to find better ways to deal with angry patrons, and this is one of them. But I will also tell you that if it doesn't come naturally to you, which it does not to most people, that it takes time to develop this. So please be kind to yourself while you're trying to work on this, because it's not something that most of us just automatically do. We're just not that willing to give up reins in a certain situation by thanking that person for something that they've done during the interaction. So you need to be believable, because if you thank them and you're not believable, you've created a new barrier and a new issue for them to be upset about. And now they're going to end up with your supervisor complaining about you, and the supervisor is going to have to figure out a way to say thank you. So really think about your believability and your sincerity when you're saying thank you to somebody. It's not effective if it's not sincere. Number 3 says, and these are from your handouts, of course, that you had in the link that was sent to you to sign on today. Your tone of voice becomes crucial when you're thanking an angry patron. Really, your tone of voice is crucial all the time, isn't it, Mark? Your tone of voice, even if you're thanking them in a good situation. I know, I'm just as sure as I'm sitting here that everybody in this room has experienced times where you've gone out to somebody, they've said thank you, yay them, because they've been told they had to as part of their job training, but it was so meaningless, it left you with a negative feeling. Would you raise your hand or type into the chat box if that's ever happened to you? Where when somebody did say thank you and it wasn't even a negative situation, you felt negative. Exactly. Several of us have felt that way. Isn't that something? That they can't even say thank you in a way that expresses that you're the reason they have the job. Well, the same thing happens in the library, doesn't it? So your tone is crucial when it's good and a good situation, which is just as important as when it's an angry patron, but it becomes maybe more I won't say more important, but it makes it a lot edgier, doesn't it, when your tone is negative in an angry patron situation. It's just a more negative situation. Joan said tone of voice and body language is more important sometimes than the words. Absolutely. And if you notice out in society these days with more and more social media, more and more people are having trouble interacting with people in the way some of us were taught. Many of us were taught the manners and the courtesy that somebody mentioned earlier. We were taught that, and it needed to be sincere, and it needed to come from the heart. But as you see more and more people not communicating face to face, it's becoming less and less obvious that somebody might actually appreciate you or be willing to say they're sorry about something. So we need to be aware of that. Think about all the articles that are being written now about social media and how people are hiding behind that to be really nasty people because they look at it as anonymity. It's not. People usually find out who's saying it and who's putting those things out there. But those same people then are going out and interacting with people face to face, and you know they're not being kind and courteous. Lynn also added eye contact is important, and it's limited when thanking somebody. So imagine, Lynn, if I'm thanking you for something within a process that has caused you to be angry. The chances of me making eye contact then go down, don't they? Unless I'm really focusing on it, unless I'm thinking, you know what, I need to appreciate this patron for bringing this to my attention or whatever it might be, and making eye contact that way, it's going to be really difficult to do it in an angry situation since we don't see a lot of it even in a good situation. So tone of voice, body language, facial expressions, all those kinds of things become crucial when you're thanking an angry patron. Several of you have already mentioned other factors. We've mentioned tone of voice, body language, eye contact. Can you think of anything else that might become very critical as to how it affects your believability when you're saying thank you to an angry patron? Any other things? One has to do with eyes, and it's not eye contact. Yes, exactly, Lynn. I've been in situations where I've seen one employee roll their eyes to another employee. I've been in situations where that was me that was being the eye rolled at person. I've been in situations where it was somebody else they were rolling their eyes about, but my thought was, what are they going to do when I come up to the counter? Facial expressions, absolutely, Danielle. Eyebrows. Look at the lady's eyebrows in this picture. You can tell by her eyebrows and the set of her mouth that she is not a happy camper. So if she was saying thank you, and I've seen people look like this when they've said thank you in an angry situation, then you not only you weren't believable, but you were less than believable. You actually made it worse by looking like this. Here's another thing we don't often think about. What about what else we're doing? If we're irritated with the person across from us because they're angry and it sounds personal and our defenses come up, sometimes people will either start doing something to almost dismiss that person, or they will continue doing something they were already doing to dismiss that person. Either way, it's going to create more of a barrier. That's what I want to keep stressing this morning. If we aren't paying attention during this angry interaction from our patron, and again, it may not always be totally angry, it could just be frustrated, irritated. You can tell that they're just really not happy with what's going on. They may not be throwing a fit, although some people do, but you just know that you're not getting through to them, that you want to serve them. So we need to make sure we have to be aware of that during the process and make sure that we're believable. So if we're doing other things, or we pick something up to start doing other things, then they are going to feel like we are dismissing them. And truly we are, aren't we? If we are picking some other work up. I know again that all of us have experienced that, where we've been, even in a good interaction, where we've been interacting with somebody and they pick something else up. I was buying furniture on New Year's Day. Had a really good, I thought, salesperson. And lo and behold, about 2/3 of the way into our conversation, he picked up his phone. Now, he did explain that it was from his boss at another store. I'm kind of okay with that, but I would think the boss would understand if he didn't pick up it was because he was with a customer. So even in a good situation, the fact that he decided to do something else was a little bit of a stopper for me, but I will tell you I went ahead and bought the furniture there because I'd had such bad experiences other places that was better than my bad experiences. So just understand that stop what you're doing and don't pick anything new up until you handle this process. And sometimes it takes a while, doesn't it? Some people will handle their anger or their frustration very quickly. Other people will take so long you think, is this ever going to end? But when you pick something else up, unless it directly relates to helping them, or you continue doing something and don't pay attention to them, it's very dismissive. And again, we don't know what they've been going through before they got to the library, but most of us have been dismissed and disrespected at some point as a customer, and so we're just aggravating things and adding fuel to the fire if we continue to do that. Number 5 says, what happens if the angry patron doesn't believe you're sincere in thanking them? Joan said, let me address Joan's comment first. It's also important for coworkers to be aware you're with a customer and not interrupt you. That's a great point, Joan, and we do need to sort of train our coworkers, don't we? So that if they're interrupting us, it's the same thing as telling that patron that they're not important enough for me to give them their full attention. So from our standpoint, it's our responsibility to say to the coworker, I'll be right with you as soon as I take care of Mrs. Smith's problem. As soon as I make sure Mrs. Smith is happy. As soon as I make sure I've handled this the way she needs it handled, or whatever it might be, whatever feels comfortable to you, it may be your responsibility to shut your coworker down. It might be a good thing to bring up at your next staff meeting. You know, you could say, I went to a webinar, we talked about thanking our angry patrons, and one of the things that was brought up was that sometimes coworkers interrupt us when we're with an angry patron. Is it okay, or can we have sort of a code sentence that we say to the coworker to say, back off, I'm handling an angry patron? You're not going to say that, but you can just say, I'll be with you as soon as I take care of Mrs. Smith's issue. You could have a little code phrase that you use where the coworker knows, okay, I need to back off here because this is bigger than I can handle. So just be aware of that. That's a good point about coworkers. We don't often think about them interrupting us during an angry patron interaction, and yet they probably interrupt us frequently during good interactions. So why wouldn't they interrupt us during angry patron interactions? So number 5 says, what happens if the angry patron doesn't believe you're sincere in thanking them? Would you take a moment to think about that and type your thoughts into the chat box? There are no right or wrong answers here. I just want you to realize what the consequences are if we do this very flippantly. So take a moment to think about it, type it into the chat box, and we'll take a look at it. I see lots of good comments popping into the chat box. Let's take a look. I think we all understand it, and yet we're human and we still don't always get it right, but at least if we understand what's going to happen, it might influence how we handle the situation. Doreen and Iman said tensions increase and an argument may arise. Absolutely. Because you can feel it, can't you? And when that tension increases, other people feel it too, don't they? It starts to have a ripple effect. It starts to spread around us when that tension increases, even if voices aren't being raised. Have you ever noticed that when there's an angry interaction or a frustrated interaction or whatever it is, even if voices aren't loud, people start to feel the tension? And I think the reason they feel that tension is because of what you all mentioned earlier, the lack of eye contact, the body language, the facial expression, the rolling of the eyes, the arms crossed, whatever it might be, people can sense that. And when we aren't sincere in thanking them, that's what they're going to sense, and that's how they're going to react. And Adriana says that is followed then by they might not come back, or they tell others about their negative experience. And that's always bad for us, isn't it? Because that's going to have that wide impact that Adriana mentioned. The thing is, and I forget the exact statistics, but you've all heard it, that people that are pleased tell something like 3 people, and people that are displeased tell about 10. So you have to work 3 times harder to take care of the people who are displeased than you do to keep the people who are already pleased. So it does have a wide impact when we're not taking care of them. And Jan says it will escalate the problem, as Mark said. The escalation is a big word, isn't it? To me, the word escalate has always indicated, uh-oh. And I think we can all agree that we don't want those situations to escalate. Now, again, a little bit of a honesty check here. There are times that no matter what we do, it will escalate, aren't there? Because we can thank them and we can be very sincere and we can want to do everything we can to keep that relationship intact, but we don't know what's on their mind and we don't know what else they're carrying. And so let's just give ourselves credit for the fact that we're making the best effort we can to hold things together, but we cannot control how they react to us. So please understand that. If it doesn't work out the way you had hoped, as long as you did your best, then you did your best. You cannot control how they react, no matter how many workshops you go to, how many books you read, how many times you practice it. You don't know how that particular human being is going to react. Danielle says they won't come back. Absolutely. And Jack said matters may be made worse if they think you're being sarcastic. Yes. And the patron, Joan, said probably will ask to see the supervisor. That's what I was just thinking, Joan, when Jack said it may be made worse. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, supervisor's going to get involved. They may want to see the supervisor about the problem or turn and walk away and tell others that you were not helpful. And how does that make us feel? We feel awful, don't we? We feel a sense of almost shame. It's not quite shame, but it's maybe disappointment in ourselves, even if we've tried really hard because we didn't achieve it. But again, I want you to recognize if you've done everything you can, then let that go because you did everything you could. We can't beat ourselves up if they didn't respond the way we hoped. And let's see, I think there might be another comment here. Yes, Doreen and Iman said they may speak with your supervisor or boss. Then you have another negative situation to deal with, don't you? Although most supervisors are very well aware that angry patrons sort of maybe can blow things out of proportion and so forth, you still have to deal with the issues once the supervisor gets involved. And Lynn said they take away negative feelings which could result in negative publicity and comments to friends, neighbors, and family. Absolutely. You don't need that kind of publicity out in public, do you? You don't need people going out there saying, boy, I'm going to go to the library 3 miles away because our local library, I went in there and they did this and they wouldn't take care of it and they accused me of this and all sorts of things. You don't need that out there. Libraries struggle enough these days to remain viable in people's minds. You have raving fans. You have lots of cheerleaders, but you also have the people that don't understand why libraries even exist anymore, because after all, they can find everything on Wikipedia, right? I mean, that's a common conception for some people. So if you've got somebody out there in the community that already feels that way, and their next door neighbor who used to be a loyal library patron tells them how badly the thing went with you, then you've just confirmed for that person who didn't think libraries were necessary that they really aren't necessary. Now, that's not true. We know that's not true. But when that spreads, then the funding is affected, isn't it? So it's just really important for us to understand the consequences of some of the things that we're talking about today. We talked about escalation. We talked about defensiveness. If they don't believe you're sincere in thanking them, they may make another snarky remark. And when it gets snarky and personal, then you become more defensive, and then it's really hard to remember anything we talked about today, the more that defensiveness kicks in. And there's that loss of loyalty that several of you alluded to. The one thing, I think if we could protect anything in our libraries, it would be our loyal patrons. We don't want to give any of those up, do we? We want to develop more of a group of loyal patrons. But it's really hurtful to us, I think, when we lose the ones who have been loyal because they had a negative experience. And something we need to recognize here too is in today's society, people are a lot less tolerant, aren't they, of negative experiences because the options are so plentiful. They're less tolerant of not getting good service to begin with. Think about that. They can go online on the internet. Will they get as good of information? No, they will not. They'll put in a search term and they'll get 1,306,272 results, and they have to figure out which one of those is going to be appropriate for them when they could have just gone to the library. They can go to Barnes & Noble, but will they get somebody that's really engaged with the books, or are they going to get a clerk that's just going to check them out? They can order on Amazon where they get absolutely zero personal service and they have no idea what they're getting into. But the options are there. We know they're not good options, but in our society, the options are there and they can leave us and not be as loyal because they just aren't as tolerant anymore of bad service. And the sad part is, good service is so rare. So they'll just keep hopping to probably the place where it's easiest. I can sit at home, I can order this book, I can do this, I can do that, and the loyalty won't be there. And it's contagious. As several of you alluded to, they will tell other people. It's contagious to the immediate surroundings, the people that are already in the library. And how embarrassing is it when somebody's voice gets louder and louder because the situation is escalating? It's embarrassing, isn't it? But the people around you, you don't know if they're thinking, gosh, that person's being really mean to the library person, or if they're thinking, yeah, I know, I got that kind of service last week too. And it also is contagious to your coworkers, and it's also contagious to your supervisor. Now, let's say the patron has left. Whew, that's good. But it's so hard to shake that off, isn't it? So if we can address it while it's happening and de-escalate the situation, one of the ways of doing that, of course, is thanking them, then we don't have it being contagious within our library or outside in the community because we've already taken care of it and we've brought it back to where it needs to be before they ever leave the library. And of course, when they don't believe that we are sincere when we say thank you, egos get involved because they feel disrespected. They may make a comment, our ego comes into play, etc., etc. It's really hard to overcome those kinds of things. Okay, so we know we've got to figure out a way to say thank you to people and be sincere when they're upset. So my question for you is, what are some of the things that you feel you can honestly thank them for in the midst of a difficult, let's say, interaction? Maybe not angry, but frustrated, irritated, resentful, whatever it might be. What are some of the things you feel you can honestly thank them for? Let's come up with a list of at least 6 or 8 so that everybody here leaves with good, solid tools today on how to handle that angry patron by saying thank you. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that, and then we're going to see if we can create a nice long list. I see several people are still typing, so I want to make sure we have some good, solid suggestions in the chat box. Several have already popped up. But I don't want to interrupt trains of thought when we're brainstorming ideas on how to handle this because it's not easy. The more tools you have, and I would suggest that you take this handout today and put it somewhere where you can just refresh yourself occasionally. Pull it out every couple weeks and just look through this list and remind yourself of ways you can handle situations so that it becomes almost routine for you, but still sincere for you to thank them for something within this difficult transaction. Okay, I'm going to address some of the things that are in the chat box because we have some really good things in here. One of them that Lynn said was, we can thank them for working together to resolve the situation to create a win-win situation. If they sort of de-escalated themselves after we talked to them and let them vent and acknowledge their feelings and so forth, because we have to do that, don't we? We talked about that with silence. We have to let them vent and acknowledge their feelings. So now we can thank them for working together with us to resolve it. If we are able to do that and we've actually focused on them during this interaction and we've been able to thank them, when they leave, they're going to feel, some studies show that they will actually feel better about your library than if they'd never had a problem to begin with. Studies actually show that if you resolve something to the customer's satisfaction and you work it out with them, they actually leave happier than if they had never had a problem to begin with. I don't know that's true, but I can see how that would happen. It depends on how severe the problem was and so forth, but I certainly can see how they would be happy about that. And Jen said you can always thank them for bringing that to your attention. Many times when they're frustrated or angry, it is something that could be done differently or handled differently, or something could be changed to make it better for the patron. So there's certainly an opportunity many times to say thank you for bringing that to our attention. I'm going to bring that up and see if we can make any adjustments that way. I was talking to somebody a few weeks ago, and she said we had a patron come in, and I may have mentioned this at our last session, but she said we had a patron come in who had been trying for almost a year to get a library card for her daughter, who was taking summer school and needed now a particular book to finish reading before she went back to school in the fall. School was going to start on Monday. It was Saturday. She said, I've been here. I've worked with 3 different library staff, and I still don't have my library card. So this staff member, of course, apologized. I'm so sorry. I don't know how that happened. I'll check into that for you. But in the meantime, we need to get that book for your daughter. She said, I can't get you the card today until we get the forms processed. I don't know what was so dramatic about the forms that they couldn't get them processed 3 different times. But she said, we do have a program where you can get on the computer and check that book out here for $2, some kind of a $2 computer access. And she said, would you be able to do that? Now, of course, me being the customer service person that I am, I'm thinking I would have found a way to pay that $2 for her, but at least she had an option. And the lady said, of course I'll pay $2. So they spent the day at the library reading this book that the daughter needed, and she left feeling like she had gotten it taken care of. But certainly there was something in there that needed to be brought to somebody's attention if it took somebody that long to get a library card. Even if that was the first time that ever happened, there's some kind of a glitch in that system, isn't there? So why not thank them? My goodness, you might alleviate one person a month having that frustration by actually fixing the problem. So thanking them for bringing it to your attention. Thank you for asking that question. Let me see how I can help you best with that. And we think of questions as being kind of innocent and friendly, but they're not always. They can be frustrated about it. I'm working with a client right now, and we're going to be talking about customer service in a few months, and she said one of the things that we experience is that a lot of our snowbirds come back into town and they think we should behave the exact same way their library back home does. And not behave, but we should have the same offerings, we should have the same rules and policies and so forth. So when they're asking those kinds of questions, they're a little frustrated already, because in their mind, a library is a library is a library. And isn't it amazing, if any of you have ever dealt with other libraries or you've worked in other libraries, that the policies can be polar opposite? That some libraries use library fines to fund real specific programs, and some libraries have gotten rid of fines completely. Some libraries, instead of a fine, ask you to bring a canned good when you return a late book. So the policies are all over the map. So you can understand a patron's frustration when they come into a library, which in their perception, and that's their reality, isn't it? In their perception, why isn't this library just like the library back home? They don't understand it. So they're already frustrated. So if you can say, thank you for asking that question, let me see how I can help you with that, and then I'm going to check in to see if there's anything we can do about it. I also talked to somebody a few weeks ago who said they have somebody from Michigan that calls them to find restaurants in a local city in Michigan that they can go to. And they finally connected the dots and realized that this person calls periodically and talks to different staff members. They were in a staff meeting one day, and she said, I'm sorry, I was on with a lady from Michigan, and somebody else said, oh yeah, I've talked to her before, and they started talking. So the next time the lady called, they said, we love having you call, but can we ask why you call us instead of your local library? And she said, well, I was there on vacation one year, and I came in and I needed something, and everybody was so helpful. It's just easier for me to call you. That's astounding, isn't it? that she lives, and I'm pretty sure it was Michigan. I'm not picking on Michigan, but I think it was Michigan. And she felt that the people in Florida could be more helpful to her over the phone than going to her own library or calling her own library. So certainly be open to those questions. Nowadays, what's happening in our libraries is we have had some policies and procedures in place for years and maybe decades. Maybe this patron is giving us an opportunity to step back and say, why do we have this policy? Why do we have this procedure? Yes, it was very effective in 1990, but 1990's a quarter of a century away. It's gone. It's been gone for over a quarter of a century. Do we need to step back and say, is this effective? Is this creating the environment that we want to create in our library? This patron brought this up, and although they were a little bit upset about it, maybe it's an opportunity for us to look at that. And couldn't you even say that to a patron? You know, we've not looked at that for several years, and you've just given us an opportunity to do that. Thank you for that. Wouldn't that be something that you could thank them for? So the opportunity to revisit some of your policies and procedures. Not that you're always going to be able to change them, because there might be legitimate reasons for them. But to assume that they're still valid 25 years later might be a mistake as far as taking care of other patrons. Mark says you can thank them for using the library in the past as a loyal customer, and we'll do everything in our power to solve this situation. And that doesn't always happen, does it, Mark? Because sometimes you go in, and I've experienced this in a library situation where you go in and you've got an issue, and the person on the other end is just going to do whatever has to be done to get rid of you. Whether you've been loyal or not, they're not going to do everything in their power. In their mind, everything in their power is whatever's in front of them, get rid of you out the door. So that's a big one. Thank you so much. I know you've been using the library for years. We're going to figure out a way to fix this for you. Danielle said, thank them also for their patience as we're dealing with the problem. Absolutely. People don't have much patience anymore, do they? And we understand why. Everything's instant. How many of you, and you don't have to even say yes in the chat box, but I know most of you will agree with this, how many of us in the last, let's say, 3 days or this week have clicked on a website and it didn't load fast enough for us because it took a whole second? I mean, most of us would agree with that. It's who we are, right? So think about that. That's what this person's been dealing with the whole week, and now they come into you, and you're going to take 5 minutes to fix this problem? Why so long? Right? So if they're patient, please thank them for their patience. And if you've ever been to any of my programs, you've probably heard me say what gets rewarded gets repeated, but I am a huge believer in that. Whether we're talking about supervising people, whether we're talking about working with patrons, whether we're talking about children, what gets rewarded gets repeated. So if you thank them for their patience and you're sincere and you smile at them and you say, you know, some people just aren't as patient as you are, and it's so nice to have somebody that's willing to help us work through this. The next time they come in with an issue, and hopefully they never will, but in reality they could, the next time they come in, you rewarded them for their patience the last time. What are they going to do? They're going to try to be more patient, aren't they? They may not be more patient with other people that they have to deal with out in the world, but when they come into the library and they remember that Danielle really spent some time with them and then thanked them for their patience, they're going to remember that. And they might even seek out Danielle, and Danielle's thinking, oh no, please don't let them seek me out. I don't need any more angry patrons. But you know what? Chances of them being as angry the next time, unless it happens all the time and they just can't get their stuff resolved, then you can understand why they would be frustrated. But Danielle says it's happened because she's been polite to them. She's appreciated their willingness to be patient with her. And so the next time they come in, they check for her and they try to find her. But I'd be willing to bet that the next time they come in, they're not as frustrated, maybe not as mean, maybe not as angry, because they know Danielle will help them work through it and that she appreciates them being there to begin with. Okay, let's look and see if I've got anything on the list that you didn't put. We've said patience. I think that is huge because, again, it might only take 5 minutes, but in today's world, that seems like an eternity to some people. So thanking them for their patience can make a huge difference in how they interact with you. Thank them for their understanding. Maybe there is a policy that you have already checked into and because of XYZ happening or because of the way the funding is set up, it's not possible for your library to change that policy, but maybe you found an option for them and they go away and they're half happy. They're not totally happy because they didn't get exactly what they want, but thanking them for their understanding. I really appreciate your understanding about the state putting this policy into effect because of XYZ happening. I know it's not convenient for some of our patrons, but I appreciate your understanding. And that softens that blow a little bit, doesn't it? If you're sincere about it. And certainly if they've shown any understanding at all, you should be sincere about it because so many people could care less. It's sort of, I don't care what your problems are, fix it. And if you've got that person that says, yeah, I know, the state, they get involved and then, whatever, and whatever they might agree with, thank them for their understanding. Thank them for their calmness. They were frustrated when they came in. You've explained what you're going to help them do. It takes a little while. And I don't know that you would call it calmness, but you could say, thank you for your Zen-like feelings or whatever it might be. Find a phrase that works for you that says, and patience is good for that, except that the calmness is something different, isn't it? Thank you so much for your calm attitude. That helps a lot because we do have people that come in and get really loud and verbally abusive, and I really appreciate your calm attitude because it makes my job more pleasant in trying to help you get what you need. So calmness sometimes, because not everybody stays calm. D says cooperation. Maybe you had to have them fill out another form and they are frustrated by that because they've already filled out this form 3 times this year and they still don't have a library card. Well, if they cooperate and go ahead and fill out the form one last time, first of all, please make sure you walk the form through and they get their library card or whatever the situation might be. If they've had frustrations in the past, but they're cooperating with you to go through this all again to get it resolved, then say thank you for that cooperation. Again, what gets rewarded gets repeated. It's the best reasoning behind thanking them sincerely for whatever's happening in this angry interaction. Thank them for their help. Maybe they did something that sped up the interaction. Maybe they did something that made it easier for you. Maybe they did something that, maybe they stepped aside because they saw somebody else had something quick that needed to be handled and they needed to get out of the library. Thank you for your help in getting that taken care of really quickly. Whatever it might be, but thank you for your help. I hope you have you're developing a long list here in your notes because, like I said, if you go back and refer to this occasionally, it will become second nature to you to find something to thank them for in the interaction, and you may have to look really hard sometimes. Taking the time to tell you. They don't have to. They can just go to another library. And I've had people tell me many times in the last 15 years that I've been working with libraries. I've even had librarians tell me, I don't go to the library closest to my home because I don't feel like they appreciate me. And isn't that what thanking them is all about? Do you know in life that some studies show that what people really want to feel is appreciated and valued? That's what they want from life, the people they interact with. So if you thank them for taking the time to tell you about this issue and they feel appreciated and valued, then they come back to you instead of the library 3 miles down the road. So taking the time to tell you. Everything we're talking about here today has to do with making them feel heard, making them feel appreciated, making them feel valued as a patron. And the words thank you can go a long way toward that. Maybe pointing something out, period. Did you realize this is happening? Did you realize that when you go to your website, this is what happens? I sent an email to somebody the other day that the website wasn't working. I didn't hear back from them, but I hope they appreciated that. I was very frustrated. I had tried 3 times, and it was a library. I tried 3 times to get into the website. I needed an address, and it wasn't working. And I realized they were probably working on it, and then I thought, well, maybe they're not. Maybe nobody has told them. And if nobody was accessing it right at that moment, so I told them, and I hope they appreciated that. Number 7 says you can't thank them unless you have first listened to them. And I found this little icon on one of my clip art sites that I subscribe to. Listening is focused, it's voluntary, and it's intentional. The voluntary made me smile because I thought, yeah, you really do have to volunteer to listen, don't you? You can refuse to listen. You can be looking somebody straight in the eye, making eye contact, and not listening to a word they say. You hear it, You're just not listening because you're checking out. But it made me kind of smile that it was voluntary. But definitely it needs to be focused and intentional, doesn't it? You can't be looking around at other coworkers or other patrons or down at your computer or any of those things. How can you thank them for something within this negative conversation unless you've been listening to them first? And listening is that's a whole workshop in itself, because none of us do it as well as we could. I won't say should, but as well as we could. That includes Linda Bruno, and I actually teach workshops on listening. But we are human. Our minds go to something else, or we get bored with a discussion, or we're frustrated ourselves, or whatever it might be, or we don't feel good, or we've got vacation planned and that's what we're thinking about, or we're having pork chops for dinner, or whatever it might be. We aren't paying attention. And let me just caution you that it's very easy to check out of a negative conversation with a patron and to start thinking about those things. Pork chops for dinner, or vacation, or what I'm going to do after work tonight, or gee, this is the third time this week I've had to deal with this, and boy, I wish I didn't have to deal with angry patrons, or whatever it is. When we're thinking those thoughts, we are not listening, we're not focused, we're not intentional. And you cannot thank them sincerely unless you've listened. So listening is a key point in the thank you process. And you know what? Listening helps de-escalate, doesn't it? Do you remember when we were talking about silence, for those of you who were at our first session in this series? We talked about they want to vent. They need to be acknowledged. And listening is part of that and helps you to de-escalate the situation so that you can start solving the issue for them and finding something to thank them for. What are other ways you can tune in to times when a thank you might be in order? What can you think of? What are other ways you can tune in to find those times when a thank you might be in order? One of the things I put down was observe them. So thinking along those lines, what other ways can you tune in to try to find those opportunities to say thank you? I see that, Mark. Yeah, this is a little challenging, isn't it? But you really do need to find ways to tune in, don't you? So I put down observe them. What is their body language? What are their visual clues? Do you see them kind of relaxing as you're working through this issue? That might be a clue that it's a good time to say thank you. If you start saying thank you right at the beginning when they are highly irritated and their mind is totally focused on how you mess things up, that's probably not going to be the best time to say that. So be very observant about how they're interacting with you. And as it starts to de-escalate a little bit, that might be when you say thank you for understanding, thank you for your cooperation, thank you for your patience. So your observation becomes important, doesn't it? And of course, that's part of listening. You're observing them while you're listening. So you can see when they've sort of run out. Joan says sometimes their tone of voice changes and they start to give you positive words. Absolutely. And then the understanding comes in, and the patience and the cooperation and the win-win situation and all those things. I know that question was a little tough to just throw out there, but we do need to find ways that we can tap into opportunities to say thank you. So I have observed them. Open your mind. When you come into this, I know that it's very difficult to just walk into a negative interaction with a patron and say, okay, I'm going to learn something today. But sometimes you do. You learn that your policies don't work. You learn that if you had done it this way, they could have gotten out quicker. You learn that you're missing a piece of information on your website. You learn that whatever. So open your mind to the fact that maybe this person, remember this is their reality, so maybe there is a piece of reality in there. And if you open your mind to that, you have more of an opportunity to say to them, I never even realized that. Thank you so much for calling that to our attention. You know, we work with this stuff every day, and it's just so second nature to us, we didn't even realize we had missed a step on the application for you to fill out for your library card. Or we didn't even realize that it was very difficult to find the change for the copier, and so now we have change available, whatever it might be. But open your mind to the fact that they may have a piece of information that could be very helpful to you, and think about the number of people that you can avoid that negative situation with the next time because this person helped you. Joan says you have to be intuitive. Absolutely. You have to sense that. That's that emotional intelligence, isn't it, Joan? You have to be self-aware and manage your own emotions, which helps you be socially aware and understand their emotions. Now, I didn't say you have to agree with their emotions, but if you understand where they're coming from, that's called empathy. Then you can have that relationship management, and you open your mind to, you know what, they may have some really good information here. Let's say you have a patron that has something negative to say every time they come in. But if you step back and look, sometimes it's spot on. Well, then the next time you're going to change this or that, you might say, you know, Mrs. Smith, the last time you were in, you mentioned to us that we could look at this a little differently, and we are trying to do that. And now we're thinking about doing this. What problems do you see might happen there? And you tap into them as a resource. Oh my goodness, that's really opening your mind to a negative patron, isn't it? She's going to be negative probably. But if we don't think of it as negative and we think of it as information gathering, if you will, then we've opened our mind to ways we can serve our patrons better. It's very easy to get into a routine and think that that's the only way to do things in our jobs, isn't it? For all of us, no matter what jobs we hold now or have held in the past. We get into a routine, this is the way it works, this is why we do it this way, and this is it. This is how it is. Lynn says, but perhaps the acknowledgement will open her mind. Absolutely, Lynn. Exactly, because you're trying to develop that relationship, aren't you? And when you say, you know, you mentioned to us we did this, she might realize that she mentions something all the time. She might not, but we can always hope, right, Lynn? Check your ego and emotions. That's one way to tune in to when a thank you might be in order, is when you know that this interaction, you can hear it already, is going to be a little bit more tense than you would like it. There's going to be some friction. Just say, you know what, I'm not going to get personally engaged in this. I'm going to try to help solve this person's problem. Now, 5 minutes from now, you may be personally engaged because they may have said something that just tripped your trigger, and it may have gotten you personally engaged. Then you have to use that emotional intelligence and say, okay, that negative emotion came in. It's not serving me well. I love that statement to myself, and I use it a lot. When I get negative or I get frustrated or I get angry, I actually have said to myself out loud, luckily I work alone, so nobody hears me saying it to myself, but I will say, how's that serving you well? And it's not. Or as Dr. Phil used to say, I never watched his program completely, but I used to see him on little commercials where he would lean over and say, and how's that working for you? I say that to myself sometimes. So when you allow this negative patron to get under your skin, and make you upset and frustrated, and they leave and go on their merry way, you continue to carry that anger and frustration, don't you? So I'm just going to lean across the proverbial desk to you today and say, how's that working for you? It's not. It doesn't result in anything positive when you take on that negativity and give it right back to the patron. It just doesn't serve us well, does it? So let's not do it, or at least let's lessen doing it. Because we all are going to get engaged that way from time to time. We're human, they've stepped on our toes, or we've had a bad morning already, or whatever it is, and when they say a certain thing, it's going to trigger us into negative emotions, or our ego is going to flare up, or whatever. It's going to happen. But if we can lessen that a little bit, then our interactions are going to be more positive. It may be appropriate to express empathy when you thank them. I can understand. It may be appropriate, not always, and some people really don't like to do this. It may be appropriate to express empathy when you thank them, as in, I can understand that why that would be frustrating. I did a program a while back, and we were talking about just basic things in customer service, like saying, I'm sorry. And somebody raised their hands and they said, I've been to a lot of workshops, and a couple of them have said, don't ever say you're sorry. And I just stood there looking at this person, and I said, well, I think I'm going to have to disagree with them respectfully, and I don't know where they were coming from to say that, and certainly there are times you don't need to say you're sorry, but I have found that that sort of greases the wheel, if you will. If I say, I'm so sorry that happened, they said, well, you're not supposed to take responsibility, and I said, well, sometimes it is the library's fault. So why shouldn't the library take responsibility? And as a representative of the library, then in their mind, you are the library. But I said, we certainly can always say, I'm so sorry that happened. Can't we? And to not ever say I'm sorry, to me, over a long period of time does not lead to loyal patronage, I don't think. If somebody makes a mistake and I'm the customer, I want them to say I'm sorry. I want them to say I'm so sorry that happened, even if it was something that happens all the time. If it's something that inconvenienced me or caused a problem for me, I want somebody to apologize to me. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. But I think sometimes it is appropriate to express empathy when you say thank you. Thank you so much for calling that to our attention. I'm so sorry that happened to you. I may have mentioned this at the last session because I use this example a lot because it's so fresh in my mind. It happened a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, when I ordered a power chair for my husband. And we got it, and 5 days after we got it, it quit working. And I called, and it was a frustrating day anyway, and I got to tell you, I wasn't a real nice customer. That my tone of voice said, I said to her, we ordered this chair, we waited 8 weeks for it, we paid this much money, and it was a ton of money. And I said, it's 5 days after we got it and it quit working, you might as well pick it up and give us credit. That's how I said it, because I was just so frustrated. Before I even got it out of my mouth, she said, you would have had to return it within 3 days to get credit. And then she looked at my file and she said, and you couldn't even return it then because it was special order. And there was no empathy. There was never, I'm so sorry that happened. Occasionally in transit, the wires get jiggled. We'll send somebody out right away. There was none of that. There was no empathy. Didn't matter I'd waited 8 weeks. Didn't matter I spent all that money. Didn't matter it only took 5 days for it to break. Can you hear all that? Guess what? I needed some furniture. 11 months later, I didn't even walk into that store. I will never walk into that store because there was no empathy. And I know that if I have a problem, I'm going to have obstacles to overcome to even get my problem resolved. Joan says it's important when you empathize about the problem, you apologize about the situation. Absolutely. Don't be apologizing about the coworker. Well, they never do that right. I'm so sorry she did that to you. She should not. I hear this sometimes. She shouldn't have done that. I don't want to hear any of that as the customer. I just want to hear, I'm so sorry that happened. We'll take care of that for you. There might have been a misunderstanding on her part or something like that. You can apologize if there was a misunderstanding or a miscommunication, but don't throw anybody under the bus. And I hear it done all the time. And I hear it done without verbal acknowledgement that the coworker was at fault. I see the rolling of the eyes as in, yep, we've got this person that can't do anything right. They don't say that, but because they roll their eyes, that's how I feel before I leave. So be very, very careful about that and understand that empathy is important in a situation where a patron is upset. So what might result from a sincere thank you? Give that a moment of thought and type that into the chat box. And again, I see several of you typing. Thank you. I see good comments coming up already in the chat box. First comment I see is repeat business. And isn't that what we're all after? If we don't have any repeat business, we aren't going to have a repeat job, are we? We aren't going to have a job if we don't have repeat business. There aren't enough people in any of our communities to keep us going as new patrons if we don't have loyal patrons that come back to us. And they also might thank you back. Absolutely. And when they do that, it then de-escalates again, doesn't it, Doreen and Iman? It de-escalates because they've acknowledged now that you are trying to help them, which is important sometimes. Continued loyalty, absolutely. You want that continued loyalty. You want them to be the ambassador for you out in the community, don't you? Good publicity is part of that. They're out there telling people what a wonderful library they have. And Danielle says a better relationship with our patrons. And you know what? When you see them come in and you have a better relationship, and even though you know something might crop up that you have to deal with, it still makes life easier, doesn't it? It makes your job more enjoyable when you have that better relationship. And Joan said the person will tell others that you solved the problem and they'll come back. That's what you want. Adriana says the patron feels they came to the right place, and you do get that repeat business. Absolutely. Lynn said resolution feels great. That's the key I want to make about today. One of the key points is that when you say thank you and it's sincere, even if, and I'm just going to throw this out there, even if it doesn't help, you feel better because you did what you could do to solve the situation and to make this person feel valued. You don't know what they're bringing into the library, what past experiences, what happened to them this morning, what they're going through in their lives, what their personality is. Maybe they love being miserable. Some people do, and maybe that thank you sincerely said won't even matter to them. It still will feel good to you if you know you did that and you leave that interaction feeling better. And as you said, as Lynn said, if you can resolve it completely, that feels wonderful. And if you resolve it, 9 times out of 10 we resolve those situations, but maybe only 8 times out of 10 we resolve them in a positive way. So if you move that to 9 times out of 10, you're going to feel better about that. That feels a lot better than resolving a situation, getting rid of Mrs. Smith, and she's out the door, and we're glad she's out the door, but we know she's not really happy. And Joan says the next time there's a problem, they may not be so mad. That's the result. Those are some of the results of a sincere thank you. More loyalty. That's huge. I'm hearing from more and more library folks across the state and sometimes out of state where they are concerned that they're, over the years, because the library is the library is the library, they've not really had to focus too much on this. Some of them do automatically, and that's wonderful. Some of you all do. I'm sure you all do because you're here today. You wouldn't even be here if you weren't interested. But in many cases, other coworkers or other libraries have just sort of gone along because they're the library. Where else are people going to go? And that mentality has carried over into an age where they have a lot of other options. So that loyalty piece that we really didn't give a lot of thought to as recently as maybe 10, 12 years ago has now become almost critical to the survival of our libraries. That's why everybody's scrambling around saying, what other things can we offer that will bring people into our libraries? Because they're not necessarily coming to us for books anymore. Or maybe they're not coming to us for music anymore, or whatever it might be. How can we create that loyalty? Well, of course, we're going to try to offer more things. We're going to try to create some place that they like to be, but we also have to handle the situations that come up, don't we? So that they are loyal to us. Better public relations, as several of you mentioned. A better atmosphere. Don't forget that benefit that we've alluded to here this morning. The atmosphere is better when you've tried to handle something in a positive manner by thanking that patron for cooperation or pointing something out or whatever it might be, their understanding, their patience. Then when they leave, you're not all wound up. They didn't get other people wound up because you de-escalated it. And now it's 10 o'clock in the morning and you've got a pleasant day ahead of you. I want you to think of the opposite. Just close your eyes for a second. You've handled this patron coming in. You got rid of them, but you got rid of them. Okay? Big difference than handling the situation in a way that makes them a loyal patron. But you got rid of them and they're out of there, and whew, aren't you glad she's out of here? And so now you've gotten yourself all riled up. You've gotten your coworkers riled up. What's the next patron coming in going to feel? They're going to feel that anxiety, aren't they? They're going to feel that pent-up frustration from you. So the better atmosphere comes into play because now it's a lot more pleasant to go to work when you can de-escalate the times that somebody is angry rather than just get rid of them. And I've been in situations where people have just tried to get rid of the angry customer. They do eventually get rid of them, but the atmosphere still remains negative. I've been in situations where people have argued with the angry customer. We all know that's a no-win situation. It doesn't matter whether you're right and they're wrong. Somebody says, well, the customer's always right. And years ago, I had a lady that worked for me, and she said she'd worked at a previous job where her boss told her, she said, Betty, the customer isn't always right, but the customer's always the customer. And that's what people forget, isn't it? So if you understand that they are always the customer, and if you create an environment where they left feeling better and you left that interaction feeling better, then it's a lot easier to get up and go to work the next morning. And Lynn says, yes, Actually, positive resolution feels great. Exactly, Lynn. And she said the other patrons who witness the interaction feel awkward. It's very awkward to be in that situation. And you know what? If I'm the other patron, I start to put up barriers before I get to you, don't I? If I hear you interacting with a patron in a negative way and you're not even trying to solve it, you're not trying to be kind, I don't hear any thank you or even any sense of that you appreciate that person, then while I'm waiting, guess what's happening in my mind? I am building up that wall and that barrier and that obstacle that I now feel I have to overcome before I can get my situation resolved. Because I heard how you treated that person, I'm going to assume, whether that's good or bad, I'm going to assume you're going to treat me the same way in that kind of an interaction. So now we've got that barrier to overcome before we can even start resolving my problem. Because I do feel awkward and I start to feel tense about how you're going to treat me. We're all human. We all want to be valued and appreciated. So if I know you're not valuing and appreciating that other patron, then I'm going to think that that's how you're going to treat me. And here's the other thing. When the patron leaves and you've had a positive resolution and you were sincere, but you're real happy to see him gone, please don't express that, because somebody else will pick up on that, and the first thing they think is that what you say when I leave? Joan says, it's funny, you can have 20 positive interactions in a day and you don't remember, but one negative one will ruin everyone's day. And Mark agrees with that. That even qualifies for the evaluations for my programs. I can do a face-to-face workshop and have glowing evaluations, good comments from people that really got something out of it, which is my whole point. And I'll have one person that'll say, I talked too long, or I didn't have donuts, or I had too many slides, or something like that. And I don't get the opportunity to resolve that because, first of all, the evaluations are done at the end and they're anonymous, and I don't collect them until people leave so that they feel free to speak freely. But even then, Joan, that negative interaction, if you will, leaves me depressed for a couple days. So if I get the chance to de-escalate that during a workshop, I would much prefer that, because I don't know how to resolve that person's problem. Yes, donuts, Mark. I can't provide those at webinars. Sorry. If you were all face-to-face, I'd give you candy, but you're not here. So a better atmosphere. Just keep that in mind as we finish up today's program, is that that's one of the main reasons you would want to do this. Not to be manipulative, not to do it fake, falsely, but that it's very sincere. And what I have found in the past is that people that have really tried to incorporate thanking patrons for their frustrations also tend to interact with their own co-workers in a more positive manner. So that's contagious as well, isn't it? If I'm really focused and intentional about listening to this person's problem and finding an opportunity to thank them for something within that interaction, then when I'm done with that, I do feel good. Like Joan said, I feel very positive about that. And when I feel positive about that, I look back, I think that was Lynn that said that, I look back at that interaction as I'm dealing with my own co-workers, and I feel positive about them as well. So a better atmosphere can do nothing but serve us well. So consider that when you're trying to find opportunities to say thank you. When you thank somebody, even when they're angry, it makes them feel important. It makes them feel respected. It makes them feel appreciated and valued, as I said earlier. We don't get enough of that nowadays, especially with texting and instant messaging and even emailing. We don't hear that. We don't feel that. We don't feel the love, as they used to say. So when you can do that to people, it does make their life better. Even if it's only temporary and they go to the grocery store and they get disrespected there, at least they felt better after their interaction with you. And I don't know about you, but the longer I live, the less respected I feel as a customer. I just don't feel that much anymore from any place. So the more we can do that, the more they're going to want to be at your library. And that's what we're trying to work toward. Saying thank you tells them we're in this together. And I like that verbiage. We're in this together. We're trying to solve this problem together. That's what I'm here for, is to solve the problem that you have. Even if internally I don't understand why it's such a big problem, if they do, I need to help them solve it so that we can work together. And when you say thank you, that's what that says, doesn't it? It says, I'm involved in this, you're involved in this. Let's figure out a way to make sure you're happy. 13 says, don't decide right up front that just because they're angry, their complaint has no merit. I mentioned this earlier. Dig a little deeper. There might be a very valid reason that they're angry or upset or frustrated. And if there is, I've been in situations where I've been a little frustrated about something and I will express that to the person that I'm dealing with and they will say, yeah, that happens all the time. How do you think I feel when they say that? Or what do you think I'm thinking when they say, yeah, that happens all the time? Exactly, Lynn. Why does it happen all the time? Can it be fixed? Can it be changed? Can it be improved? And as Adriana said, why isn't it fixed? Jan says, we never fix anything. We don't care. That's what you hear when people say it happens all the time. Or as Mark said, we're just plain lazy. And truly, that's what the patron would think, isn't it? But I've heard it said. I've heard it said when I go around to libraries and set up for things. Sometimes it's the technology, sometimes it's the way the room is set up, whatever. That happens all the time. And I'm thinking to myself, wonder why nobody cares enough to fix it. Did you hear what I just said? Why doesn't anybody care enough? Like Jan said, like you all alluded to, is nobody paying any attention? You don't care enough? Are you lazy, as Mark said? So don't decide right at the beginning that their complaint has no merit, because there is a fairly good chance that there's something in there you could pay attention to. And certainly, even if you find yourself in your mind saying, gosh, I wish we didn't have to handle this kind of complaint all the time, step back and open the conversation with somebody that says, 5 times a week we have people come in here that have this problem. Is there anything we can do to either lessen the reoccurrence of that or eliminate it altogether? Or can we at least step back and take a look at it and see if it's serving us well? And you may not be in a position to make those changes, but hopefully you have a good enough relationship with the people who are that you could at least mention it. And if you've mentioned it and they put their foot down and they say, we're not changing this, it's always been this way or whatever, at least you did what you could. Joan said, I think it's the most important thing. What their issue is important to them. Absolutely. 14 says it's easy to fall into a habit of mentally dismissing angry patrons as old and cranky, young and arrogant, or fill in the blank. I actually have somebody sitting in a face-to-face workshop once who said, we were talking about, I don't even think we were talking about customer service, but something came up about patrons. And he leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, threw his head back and said, I always think here comes another idiot. Wow. I smiled and said, are you sure you're in the right job? And I meant it. I smiled and I said it kindly because I'm not going to heckle anybody in a workshop, but that startled me. And he meant it. He wasn't joking. I mean, we've probably all said things kind of offhand that wouldn't be real impressive if an angry patron heard us. We have to vent sometimes too. We shouldn't be doing it in front of other patrons, and we shouldn't do it loudly and obnoxiously with coworkers. But don't fall into that mental habit of dismissing them because they're old, they're cranky. Some people are old and cranky. Some people are young and arrogant and think they know everything. But that doesn't mean the person that has an issue is that way. So whatever your blank is, put it on your handout so that you don't fall into that habit of dismissing them. It is very easy to do. I will also say it's easy to dismiss a certain patron, isn't it? Oh no, here she comes again. No sense even trying because she's never happy. It's easy to fall into that trap, and understandable. Honestly, it's understandable because that's what we've heard over and over again from this person. But you know what? If they have that issue, we need to break it down and see if there's a way that we can help them with it. Why really, when it gets down to it, Joan says you should treat them as a challenge to win them over. Absolutely. Make friends with them. How can I make this a good relationship? I'm going to turn this around and make it a good relationship, so that the next time this person comes, if they look for me, that's okay, because we're going to work well together and I'm going to help them solve their problem. So yes, treat them as a challenge, or let's call it an opportunity, right, Joan? Let's put a positive spin on that and say, this is an opportunity for me to develop. We know deep down we feel they're very challenging, and I'm going to just put that out there. We know they're a challenge sometimes, but it's also is an opportunity for me to develop a really loyal patron. And those challenging patrons are the ones that can be the biggest cheerleaders and defenders of our library when there is something coming up where people are trying to cut funding or whatever, because we have solved their problem for them. We have shown that they are valuable to us and we appreciate them. So keep in mind that when we, yes, good in theory. Yep, exactly, Joan. You know, everything we've talked about is good in theory, isn't it? When you think about it, remember I've said 2 or 3 times, we're human. These are human feelings we have. These are human feelings they have. It all sounds good. We can go to workshops and we can attend webinars and read articles, and boy, that'll work. And I really get my hackles up when people say, if you do this, this will happen. Because they can't promise that. Linda Bruno can't promise that. Nobody else can promise that, because you're dealing with human beings. You're dealing with your own emotions that kind of attack you and sneak up on you. So we can't promise anything. But what I will promise you is the more you practice these things, the more likely it is you're going to have a positive experience. I can't promise you it will always be positive. But I will promise you also that if you never try anything different, nothing's going to change. That's a guarantee. If things stay the same, then things stay the same. But the more you try and work at these kinds of things, the more you will find that there are those times that please you and you think, gosh, that worked. I'm going to do that again, because what gets rewarded gets repeated for you too. So the reward for you is it turned out to be a positive experience. You turned them into a loyal patron and a cheerleader for your library. Lynn said those with opinions are visiting the library, positive or negative. Better for libraries than those who never set foot through the doors. That's another great point. I love you all in the chat box, because you bring up things that I may have thought of or may not have thought of and never verbalized, and sometimes it doesn't even pop into my head. But that's exactly right. Do we want people out there that have never visited the library? Do we want people that are coming in saying, boy, if you would have done this differently, I could have done this, or I wish you would do this differently, or why didn't you do this differently? We want those people in there, don't we? We want to have that opportunity to show them we are there to serve them, because they have given us the opportunity to improve and earn their loyalty. And I didn't pay anybody in the chat box to segue into that particular statement, but you all were thinking along the same lines, weren't you? Because that's why we want to thank them. They've given us the opportunity to improve and earn their loyalty and to serve them. Realistically, acknowledge you may have to dig deep to say thank you. Realistically, I get that. There have been some interactions that I've had with my own clients, and I love my clients, but every once in a while I get one that seems cranky. Not necessarily old and cranky, but just cranky. And I have to really kind of step back and say, okay, what do I appreciate about this? Well, first of all, they're giving me the opportunity to help them. That's enough to thank them. And that's one of the things we can add to our list. Thank you for the opportunity to help you through this. Thanks for coming back so that we can help you through this. We really appreciate you giving us this chance. Number 16 says, when might saying thank you be ineffective in dealing with the storm of an upset patron? Can you think of a situation when saying thank you, for instance, maybe it's insincere? That's one of the things that we talked about. It has to be sincere. But any other times when saying thank you might not really be all that effective that you can think of? I think maybe not only when it is insincere and we know whether we're being sincere or not. We can't fake it. But I think also when they're truly out of control. Saying thank you to somebody who's truly out of control isn't really going to solve anything, is it? Something else needs to be done in that situation, and your library probably has policies on that. Thanking them at that point because you think that's what you're supposed to do might actually be worse than just trying to get them under control. So be careful of that if there is a time when somebody's totally out of control, and hopefully that is very rare. Yes, exactly, Lynn, or the imbalanced individual where you know they'll pounce on that as if you're making fun of them or something if they're imbalanced or they're just totally out of control. You know, people snap sometimes. They aren't out of balance. They don't normally have a problem, but things have piled up on them over the course of today or this week or whatever it might be, and they are so sick and tired of being disrespected or whatever it is that you're the last straw. Years ago, I don't know, some of you remember the term going postal, because people were walking into post offices and shooting people. I always said, and I'm not being facetious, that I'm surprised people aren't going medical these days because of the rudeness in some medical facilities, the lack of care, the lack of empathy, all those kinds of things, and then you get the bill and it's 10 times higher than it needs to be and all those kinds of things. I'm surprised people aren't losing it. But there are people that just snap, and then there are those people that you know have issues anyway. It's not really going to be effective to be saying thank you, although sometimes it could be, but just be aware that there might be situations where that's not going to serve you really well. My next question for you is a little self-reflective, and you don't have to type into the chat box unless you want to, but why is it so difficult for you personally to say thank you when a patron is upset? There are some things that we each deal with in our own minds. Again, don't worry about putting it into the chat box. If you want to, that's great. But for you personally, why might it be difficult to say thank you when a patron is upset? Just think about that. Jot yourself a note on the handout so that you know what obstacle you're facing in trying to use this particular tool. Because we all have our own issues, don't we? For me, it's a little bit of an ego thing that I think they should be nicer. And so I don't think they're being fair when they act like that. And so maybe it's my, I don't know if you call it ego or pride or my sense of fairness or whatever it might be. Yes, Doreen, we take it personally, don't we? And so it becomes hard to thank somebody for being mean to us when we're taking it personally. Yes, Joan, I think that's what I was just trying to say. Because when an issue is out of my control, I'm doing the best I can, and they should be nicer to me. It's not fair that they're treating me this way, because usually it's not something I personally did. It's something that my institution did or my organization did, or a rule or a policy I have no control over, and why can't this person understand that? And why are they making such a big deal out of something in the library anyway? Don't we think that sometimes? So my question to you then becomes, how do I overcome that obstacle? If I know that's an obstacle for me, and that's one of the things that any of you that know me and have gone to other workshops, I like to challenge you to understand your own personal obstacles. And your obstacle could be 100% different than anybody in this room. And that's okay because it's yours. But I want you to reflect on, if I know that about myself, how do I overcome that obstacle? Just think about that. Jot yourself a note. I know that I might have an obstacle doing this. How am I going to overcome that? Yes, exactly, Joan. There's no mistake that's made in a library that threatens life. I need to get over myself and get over the fact that they're angry, and we just need to solve this problem. Nobody's going to die is the term I've used before. I had somebody else tell me that this is not an emergency room. We're not ER. We don't have to get that wound up in even somebody else's anger, because it's their anger. We need to remember that, don't we? It's their anger. It's not mine unless I take it upon myself. And when people say, they made me so angry, no, you allowed them to influence your emotions to the point where you got angry. You allowed that. It's as simple as that. And how's that working for you? Is it serving you well is the question we need to ask ourselves. When you find it difficult, the next time you interact with angry patron, a frustrated patron, an irritated patron, when you find it difficult to say thank you, just step back and say, how's that working for you? If I can de-escalate this by sincerely saying thank you, then we're going to have a better interaction. I'm going to have a better day. And that should work for everybody. So what have you thought about today regarding your tendency to say or not say thank you when you're dealing with upset patrons? Just jot yourself a note. What came to mind for you as we talked today about what you could use here? How can you use the information to deal better with the storm of an upset patron? And who can hold you accountable? Those are all the questions at the bottom of your handouts. What have you thought about a little differently? What has this brought to light for you? How can you use that information to deal better with the storm of an upset patron? And who can hold you accountable for that? Maybe there's a coworker that you're close to, that you trust, who can say to you, I really heard your voice escalating on that one. Or you had an opportunity to say thank you there, but I think you missed it because she was frustrating you because she was blaming you for it, or something like that. Who can hold you accountable? I find that very helpful when people hold me accountable. In the meantime, if there's anything I can ever do for you or help you flesh something out a little deeper or whatever, you have my contact information at the bottom of your first page of your handouts. Please feel free to contact me. I would be happy to help you walk through some of these things. Sometimes I'm traveling. It might take me a day or two to get back to you, but I love helping people see the other side of things from an objective viewpoint. And you're welcome to do that tomorrow, next year, 5 years from now. I'm always available to you. I love that part of my job. So until the next time, every handout should have my contact information, Adriana, for every session that I do on a webinar. At the bottom of the first page, I always put my email address. So feel free to use that whenever you need to. Thank you, Jan. I appreciate that comment. And thanks, everybody, for being here. Hope to see you for O come up. I believe it's next month. Am I right, Aaron? Coming up in March, the O of an upset patron? Okay, good. I hope to see everybody then. And if you need me in the meantime, whoops, I missed something. I'm sorry. Look at that. I missed a bunch, didn't I? How did I do that? My apologies. Where is that? Well, anyway, we talked about that. I guess I just went backwards. There you go. I just went backwards. Thanks for being with us today, and remember, if it's to be, it's up to me. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
And thank you, Linda, for a wonderful webinar. We were very lucky to have been able to participate in this learning opportunity. Some great information and a sneak peek of what is coming up. Attendees, I would like to encourage you to join us on Wednesday, February 17th for the final webinar of our management series, Successfully Supervising People, Conflict Resolution. Also, please join us for the next webinar of Swiftland's Diversity Discovery Institute Year 2, E is for Evaluating, on Friday, February 19th. And the next Handling the Storm of an Angry Customer webinar, O is for Ownership, will take place on Friday, March 18th. We hope you are all able to join us for all these upcoming opportunities, so please feel free to keep checking our CE calendar on our website, the Florida Statewide Calendar, our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, or look for your message from the Florida Library listserv. Thank you so much and have a wonderful weekend. And thank you, Jeanette, for a great job as usual.